Hey friends, it's Mauricio. This is episode 20 of Ordinary Heroes. Today I want to talk about something subtle but powerful: perception. Not your circumstances, not your resources, not your timeline, your perception. Because sometimes what we're chasing isn't a new life, it's a new lens. Let me give you some context before I go further. As you know, our house right now is not quiet. We have small children, actually, a lot of small children. Cartoons are part of the soundtrack of our life. Children's books are not theoretical, they are on repeat. And I've noticed something over the years. God doesn't only speak in quiet retreats, theology books, or long, uninterrupted prayer sessions. Sometimes He speaks in the middle of noise, through a children's movie playing in the background, through a story your kids ask you to read 5 times in a row, through something your mom forwards you that you almost ignore. Lately, I started noticing a theme through an animated movie, through a children's book, and through an interview my mom sent to me that I found unexpectedly profound. And they're all pointing to the same idea: perception. So stay with me, because I'm going to move from animated animals to a children's story to a stress specialist and then land in Philippians. And I promise, it connects. I was watching Madagascar 3 with the kids. In the movie, the group spends the entire time trying to get back to the zoo. That is the goal. That's the dream. And that's what they believe will finally make everything right again. But along the way, they experience incredible places. They build meaningful friendships. They discover new talents and passions. They even find a new vocation in the circus. And yet, they are so fixated on returning to the zoo that they almost miss what's happening right in front of them. Then they finally get back to New York, to the zoo, where it all started. And what happens? They realize something. The zoo isn't what they want anymore. They were where they needed to be all along. But until they almost lost it, they couldn't see it. And I thought, that's us sometimes. We think we know what we want. We think we know what will make us happy. If I just get there, if I just make this much, if I just reach that stage. And in the process, we miss the golden moments happening right now. That same theme showed up again in a children's book I read in our house more times than I can count. There's a story called Put Me in the Zoo. There's this talented feline who can do all kinds of tricks. He keeps telling two kids how gifted he is and how the zoo needs him. He is convinced that's where he belongs. But when he tries, he is rejected. He cannot understand why. From his perspective, it makes no sense. But the kids, watching from the outside, see something he doesn't. You don't belong to the zoo, they tell him. You belong in the circus. Eventually, he accepts it and he thrives. Sometimes we're chasing the zoo when we were made for the circus. And the stress we feel isn't because we are incapable. It may be because our perception of where we belong or what we need is slightly misaligned. And that's what made the interview my mom sent me hit differently. She forwarded me a conversation with Dr. Manuel Lopez Rossetti, a physician who specializes in stress medicine. One line stayed with me. He said, "The secret of stress is perception. Perception is not reality. Perception is the observation of reality through our own psychological processes. Two people can be in the exact same situation and experience completely different levels of stress. Why? Because what matters is not just what happens, it's what we believe is happening." He explained that stress begins with perception. If I change my perception, I change my lived experience, even if the circumstance itself continues. Now, that doesn't mean that we deny pain. It doesn't mean we minimize illness, financial pressure, or conflict. It means the lens through which we interpret reality shapes how heavy it feels. He said, there's a difference between standard of living and quality of life. Standard of living is how much you have. Quality of life is whether you enjoy what you have. Those are not the same thing. You can have a high standard of living and a low quality of life, or modest resources and deep contentment. He talked about something called the gap, the distance between your expectations and your lived reality. The larger that gap, the lower your perceived quality of life. Because sometimes our stress is not just from what we lack, it's from how far we believe we are from where we should be. He even mentioned something researchers call the U shaped curve of happiness. In many studies, people report high levels of hope and excitement in their early years, full of dreams and possibility. Then, somewhere in midlife, when responsibilities increase and expectations are high, well being often dips. Not because life is meaningless, but because pressure increases, because comparison increases, because the gap between where we are and where we thought we will be can feel larger. Some people later experience renewed contentment, not automatically, not universally, but when something shifts internally, when expectations soften, when comparison loosens its grip, when the present moment becomes more valuable than the imagined future. The improvement isn't guaranteed by age, it's connected to perception, which means it's not something we have to wait decades to discover. We don't have to postpone perspective. And that brings me to Philippians 4. This chapter isn't about surface level happiness, it's about contentment in lack and in abundance. Paul writes, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in every situation. He learned it. Contentment wasn't automatic. It wasn't personality. It wasn't because he was superhuman. And right after that, he says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That verse isn't about achievement. It's about endurance. It's about steadiness. It's about surviving both scarcity and abundance with your soul intact. And just a few verses earlier, he said, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Notice the pattern: anxiety, prayer, thanksgiving, peace. And if you want to sit with that connection between gratitude and waiting a little longer, I unpack that more in episode 16, when gratitude meets waiting. That conversation builds on this one. But here's the key for today: the circumstances may remain, but perception shifts. And I lived this. I went from one child where I could control everything to twins, where your one on one coverage becomes zone defense. Stress decreased in some ways because I learned flexibility, but it didn't disappear. Then we had three kids, and I felt constant tension between giving my older daughter attention and covering the needs of infant twins. It was exhausting. Add family dynamics, add responsibilities, add finances. Life got real. I've often heard people say, God won't give you more than you can handle. I'm not sure I agree with that. Because the day we brought home the triplets, going from 3 to 6 children, just like that, everything went out the window. That wasn't manageable. That's when I discovered something deeper, and that is surrender. With twins, people would ask, hey, do you need help? And I would decline out of pride, out of not wanting to inconvenience anyone, out of wanting to prove that I could handle it. But someone told me something that changed me recently. If someone offers help, don't deny it. That's their ministry. Don't rob them of it. And that reframed everything. I learned to accept help, food, community, support. I learned that strength sometimes looks like receiving. Before, I tried to control every situation. With 6 kids, you can't. You have to let go of your expectations and flow. You have to release the image of how things should look. And that's where perception became personal. When I had the twins, I went to counseling. My advisor said something simple, but life changing. He said, step back and see the room. He said, perception is like a pendulum. It can swing toward the worst case scenario or toward the best. And I'll be honest, I'm not naturally optimistic. I'm more of a realist, maybe with a hint of pessimist. So I tend to imagine the worst. And he asked me something that stopped me. How often does the worst case scenario actually happen? When I thought about it, rarely. Very rarely do I get to say to my wife, aha, I knew the worst would happen. I just knew it. Most of the time, life lands somewhere in the middle. Not catastrophic, not perfect, just real. But if we constantly rehearse the worst, we live under stress that hasn't even happened. That's where prayer and surrender shift perception. Not necessarily circumstances, but perception. See, Philippians 4 doesn't promise that life will get lighter. It promises that peace can guard your heart and mind. And sometimes that peace begins when we stop chasing the Sioux, stop forcing ourselves into the wrong stage, stop gripping expectations so tightly, and instead look up. If you're under stress right now, your circumstances are real. Your pressure is real. But maybe the invitation isn't to run faster. Maybe it is to step back, see the room, adjust the lens, pray, surrender, accept help. And remember, you are not carrying this alone. Contentment isn't pretending everything is easy. It is learning slowly that Christ gives you strength, right in the middle of what feels unmanageable. And sometimes, the life you're trying to escape is the very place where God is shaping your peace. Thanks for listening. I'll see you on the next one.